start by bringing in Terry Anderson, a longtime activist and DNC member from Vermont. You are supporting Congressman Ellison. What is your question?
As you all know, in many rural parts of the country, we've been bleeding votes to the Republicans, not just in the last presidential election, but for several cycles now. Democrats aren't connecting well with rural voters. My question for you all is, why do you think that's happening, and what, as DNC chair, would you do about it?
Mr. Mayor, why don't you take that?
Well, thanks. Coming from Indiana, I know exactly what you mean. And yet, we know it can be done. Not only in a city like mine have I been able to win, but also in rural areas near us. I was very proud to see a district right by us, right in Mike Pence's Indiana, where we were able to support Joe Taylor, got him elected in a Democrat state representative in a district that Trump won by 6. There are a few things that I think are important. First of all, you got to show up everywhere. Even in the counties where we're going to get beat for a long time, you still got to show up because it matters whether you get beat 80-20 or 60-40. That really adds up when you're talking about a whole district or a whole state. This is also the importance of the 50-state strategy that was dismantled largely in recent years. Everybody up here is saying that we've got to get back to a 50-state strategy. As the only candidate who was endorsed by the architect of that 50-state strategy, Howard Dean, I think I know how to get that done, especially because my state benefited from it. You know, we had, when I first ran statewide in 2010, 5 out of our 9 members of Congress were Democrats. Then we got decimated. Now we're down to 2. So I know what it means to compete and win in deep red territory. And the most important thing you have to do of all is talk to people about their lives, not the politicians and the politics.
You. Secretary Perez, I want to show you, before I ask this question, and our audience, the 2016 electoral map. Secretary Clinton failed to carry Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, states that would have delivered the White House to Democrats had she won. Now, President Trump rallied voters in those states by coming out against TPP and other free trade agreements. While you were Labor Secretary, you supported and defended TPP. So why would you be the right messenger to bring working class voters back to the Democratic Party?
Well, you know, I think implicit in that question is Tom's not a progressive. And you know what? I take a backseat to no one in what I accomplished at the Labor Department. We fought for increasing the minimum wage. We implemented an overtime rule. We attacked the issue of retirement security. I'm proud of the fact that the head of the AFL-CIO called me the best labor secretary since Francis Perkins. So I moved forward, and I was part of Team Obama, and I'm damn proud of being part of Team Obama. And when you're part of a team, you don't go to the buffet line and say, I'm going to play here or play there. And when we talked about the issue of trade, I was always talking about the American worker. And you know what? That's why I have the support of people from the labor movement. And we have to get back in rural America, because in Ohio, we weren't making house calls in rural America. That's precisely why we lost. I was in northwestern Wisconsin a couple weeks ago, and what I heard from one voter is, I feel politically homeless because you stopped showing up. And it wasn't simply that we were ignored, but we were disrespected. And so
Mr. Secretary, I just want
to
circle back to the initial question on trade. You said, quote, trade agreements like the TPP are critical to our 21st century competitiveness. Do you stand by that now?
Dana, TPP is dead. It's been dead since, last August or September. So the issue is, how are we going to move forward in response to your map? And I think a big part of how we're going to move forward is we've got to tell our message of economic security. The work that I did, lifting wages, the work that we did, making sure when people work overtime, they get paid overtime. The work that we did in making sure that when you're saving for retirement, the advisor is looking out for your best interest. These are the issues that keep people up at night.
Thank you, Secretary Perez. Congressman Ellison, I want to get to another issue that's important to Democrats. Guys, I'm asking a question of Congressman Ellison. Thank you so much. Congressman, gun control. In 2014, you told Bill Maher that you wished the Democratic Party would come out against the Second Amendment. How do you reach out to Americans who support gun rights when you don't support the Second Amendment?
First of all, let me tell you, I remember that show very well, and that is not what I said at all. What I talked about is my grandfather's shotgun, the fact that I am a turkey hunter, and I didn't say that. That was not an accurate statement. But let me tell you, I go hunting with a friend of mine named Colin Peterson, who is a conservative Democrat in rural Minnesota, and he asked me to come speak to his 7th Congressional District dinner. I'm there talking with rural voters about the things that matter to them. And you know what really does matter to them? Their jobs, their chance for a life for their kids, how trade has devastated their family. The fact is, people wake up in the morning hoping that the plant doesn't close all over this country, Indiana, Wisconsin, all over. And when they do close, people sometimes can get jobs again, but maybe at $10 an hour less. And it has really, really hurt this country. So, look, I am a believer in for people to be able to own guns. But the truth is that guns we do need background checks on guns. We do need to address the fact that people are getting murdered across this country, and none of these murders seem to bother the NRA.
Congressman, I just want to read you, since you said that wasn't what you said, I'll read you exactly what happened. Bill Maher, then why doesn't your party come out against the Second Amendment? It's the problem. Your response, I sure wish they would. I sure wish they would.
No, that was I wish you'd play the tape, because if you did, you would see that it did not go that way. But the real point is this. This country, absolutely I am for the right to bear arms, but I am not for these massive murders that happen all over this country every day. 27 kids killed in Sandy Hook, man. In my own district, a guy comes to his job and kills all of his co-workers. The owner of the business's son left homeless, left fatherless. I mean, we have a serious problem in this country around guns. And I think it is absolutely not, it's a false choice to say that you're going to ban the Second Amendment or we're going to have some common sense gun safety laws. I am for common sense gun safety laws. And
so much to use the right words when we're talking about these issues.
Well, it's also the right to not be taken out of context. I hope people will go back and look at the tape.
Mr. Mayor,
look, in my part of the
that?
country,
You're
this is
from
one of
rural-
the reasons people tune us out immediately. But there are ways of talking about this. You know, I took some heat in my community. I'm from Indiana. And I support the Second Amendment. I spent Thanksgiving morning in a deer blind with my boyfriend's father. How's that for a 2017 sentence? But when I came out for universal background checks, I took some heat. But there are ways of talking about this, and again, it's making it personal. I talked about going to the funerals of people and consoling mothers of kids, teenagers who got shot in my city. I talked about the fact that I swear in police officers with their spouses at their side, praying that they're going to come home safe every day and wanting them not to be at an arms disadvantage with people in the street. And I talked about going outside the wire with a pistol on my hip and a rifle across my shoulder in a vehicle, knowing the difference between the kinds of weapons that belong on the streets of Kabul, Afghanistan, and the ones that belong on the west side of South Bend. When we talk about it in common sense terms, we don't lose people so quickly because these are common sense values and common sense ideals. And on the issues, we win.
Congressman Ellison, would you like to respond?
Well, look, I mean, I think it's absolutely right that we connect with people where they are. And part of the reality of the country we're living in is that we wake up in the morning and hope that another mass murder doesn't happen. My colleague, Gabby Gifford, I remember the day that she got shot in the face. Congress didn't take any action after that. But I believe that people in rural America and around this country understand that that is a problem and that we don't want to take their guns away. This is a false narrative that the NRA is pushing. We just want to protect people in the communities they live in and preserve the right of hunters and home defense. All these things can exist together.
All right, thank you. These questions go to the issue of the perception of the party and how each of you would want to rebuild it. Ms. Boynton-Brown, let me bring you in on this. You said last month that your job is, quote, to shut other white people down when they try to say they are prejudiced. This was seized upon by critics of your party saying, see, they don't get it. She's shaming white people, and this is why they play identity politics, and this is why white people went for Trump. What do you say?
It's really unfortunate that the alt-right decides to take people out of context and have conversations of things that weren't said. I was having a specific conversation with the Democratic Party about how we really accomplish the goal of inclusiveness and making sure that we listen to each other. And that when we're having conversations with people who are trying to share their experiences, that we are present and we are not talking over the top of each other. For years, we have been an inclusive party, and it's time that we show with our actions that inclusivity is really what we're committed to. And that was the conversation that was being had. I want to go back to rural America because that's a really important topic. The reality is that we need to have people lifted up into the DNC leadership and strategy making that understand rural America, so that when we're going and we're having conversations, no matter what those conversations are, that we're having them in the right ways. Because we need to communicate with rural America differently than how you run for President of the United States.
Ms. Boynton-Brown, thank you. Mr. Ronan, another group that you could describe the way Ms. Boynton-Brown is, people you need to speak to more and more directly as Democrats, would be millennials. You talk about this a lot. You say it was a grievous mistake to ignore the passions of millennial voters. How was that done? How was it remedied?
So, I mean, quite frankly, it goes back to what I said earlier with having the thumb on everybody else who would otherwise participate. And to go back on the Ohio and the losing by 80 to 20 or 60 to 40, it all comes together. We do not include people in the process. And that's the issue. We're focusing on attacking Trump, focusing on what the problems are in rural America. We're talking about guns, we're talking about this and that, but we're not addressing the issue, which is people don't have a voice in government. They simply don't. The process is difficult, the process is hidden, it's enclosed. We need to be more open, we need to be more transparent, it needs to be simpler. We need to get money out of politics. I mean, quite frankly, the biggest concern I have ran across among people, not just in social media, but I've ran across in person, is they feel their voice is being drowned out by the almighty dollar. So how do you fix this? You get rid of money. You emphasize people actually coming to the table and actually having a chance to move forward and progress forward into running for office, just like during my own campaign. And I know I'm running out of time. I'd like to push just a little bit longer on it, though. When I ran for state representative, I went to my county chair and I asked them point blank, can you help me? And they said no. Then I went to the ODP and I asked them, can you help me? And they said, we will help the top 6 candidates. That's elitism. And that's not going to bring us back. That's not going to bring millennials back. It's not going to emphasize pension.
Thank you. Secretary. Secretary Perez, weigh on this.
I think there's a couple important dimensions of millennial engagement that I wanted to focus on. I think the first dimension is attitudinal. And this is about the culture change that needs to happen at the DNC. We all too frequently give a millennial a seat at the table, and we pat him on the head and say, you got your seat, now shut up. And we have to change that approach, because I'm a big believer diversity is being invited to the dance, inclusion is being asked to dance. And we need to make sure that we are both engaging in diversity and inclusion. The second point is investment, because budgets are moral documents. If someone says an issue is important, I want to look at your budget. If the Democratic Party were to say millennial engagement is important, if you looked at our budget, it's not reflected.
All right, Mr. Secretary, thank you.
We do much work.
Jammu Green and then Mr. Mayor. Jammu Green, please.
Well, as somebody who wrote the playbook on how you get young voters to turn out by increasing young voter turnout at Rock the Vote by 11%, I understand very clearly what needs to happen on this issue, and certainly budget reform to reflect that millennials are not the future of the party, they are the now of our party. And how we better engage with them is that we innovate how we operate as a party. We look at experimentation and disruption in ways that have not been welcomed into the party. And millennials can do that. So that's why I call for building innovation hubs at every single state party so that young people can come in and they can learn the concepts of experimentation. They can understand it's okay to fail up. But what also has to happen is we have to conduct business differently. We have to make our meetings less complex. We need to make our leadership opportunities easily accessible. We need to fully promote them. And then we also have to understand that there are some inclusive issues that we have as a party that need to be tackled. And we can do that by making sure that state parties do implicit bias training, making sure that they publish their staff and contracting diversity data.
Ms. Green,
These things are
Ms. Green,
important to millennials, and collaborative
You're
leadership
over time.
is where we
Thank you.
start.
Suggestion.
Mr. Mayor, you're a millennial. What do you have to say about this?
Well, one thing you could do to better engage millennials would be to put a 35-year-old in as chair of the DNC. Look, I know how it feels. I'm in my 6th year as mayor of our city. I'd say we're pretty successful. I got reelected with 80% of the vote. But I'm still occasionally confused for one of my own interns. So I know what it feels like to be patted on the head and told you're the future. The best way to show that we are the present is to actually engage us at every level, including the level of leadership. Every important change in our country and in our history has been driven by young people. It's happening again right now. You know, the Women's March, for example, that wasn't driven by the party. It wasn't driven by politicians. It was multi-generational, and there were a lot of young people out there. They were energized, and they may or may not think of themselves as Democrats. As the only person that day, who as of that day was a candidate for DNC chair, who actually went to the Women's March, I can tell you that the energy there was extraordinary, and it speaks to what millennials want most, which is something you want to be part of, something positive. Yeah, we were showing what we were opposed to. We were showing the concern and the moral line in the sand, but there was something else to it, too. This is a season for happy warriors, and you could feel it there. And you can feel it in these other things that are rising up around the country. And the question for our party is, are we going to help lead it, or are we going to be racing to catch up?
Thank you, Mayor Buttigieg. I want to turn to the issue of rebuilding in the future, and specifically, I'm coming to you, Mr. Chairman, specifically state parties.
Yes.
You said that President Obama's political arm, Organizing for America, killed state parties.
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
They killed state parties.
But how?
Listen. In 2006, Howard Dean started a 50-state strategy, and I know Governor Dean was the architect, but it was state party chairs that pushed Howard Dean in order to start that program. He started that program and invested in state parties, and as a result, we won in places that we never thought. I remember Rahm Emanuel and the Dean fights, talking about the money and all, but we won in places like Kansas, Nancy Borda. Well, in 2008, not only did we add to the majorities in the House and the Senate, we also added to that by winning the White House. And at that moment, when Barack Obama had his hand on that Bible, taking the oath of office, we had the majority in the House, the Senate, the White House. We had the majority in governorships, in secretaries of state, in attorneys general. We controlled both local and national. And what happened at that moment? OFA remained. The debt from President Obama's campaign went to the DNC, and the money that Howard Dean had placed into state parties decreased almost to zero. State parties in this country are broken. There are state parties in this country right now. In 2 years, have either they're defending one of the 25 U.S. Senate seats, or they have a governorship, or they're trying to win back their state house, and they barely have $35,000 cash on hand. You can't win if you don't have the capacity.
Thank you.
And that's why
Secretary Perez, you work for President Obama, obviously, and you work for President Obama, obviously, in the official governing capacity. But what do you say to Chairman Harrison about the idea that he basically depleted the state parties? Do you agree with that? And if so, how are you going to fix it?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with it. And I've said that a number of times. And the key is to go to school on it. And what we have to do is not only up our investments, but we've got to get back to the service culture. It's culture change. You know, there was a question before about cybersecurity. State parties can't afford to have a chief technology officer. The DNC has to do that job. When somebody is being, when you're recruiting candidates, the DNC ought to be helping to train them. When you are, when we're hiring organizers, the DNC should be training them. When Alaska flips and they become Democratic, or Kansas, in a year when Trump wins by 14 points, they pick up 14 seats in their state legislature. We should have a Center for Best Practices so that we can go to school on what happened there and take those lessons. That's what we have to do. When we're building that infrastructure, when we're getting back to basics, when we're going to rural America and saying, we are here. And you know what? We stand for economic opportunity. We are the Democratic Party. That's how we turn it around. And it's got to be long-term investments. We are too short-term all too frequently.
Thank you. Congressman Ellison, I want to turn to something else, something that was talked about before the break, about what's going on in and around the country. And I want to look at another map. 6 states, only 6 states, have Democratic governors and state legislatures. In the last 8 years, more than 900 seats in state legislatures went from Democrat to Republican. And it's mostly the legislatures that draw the congressional districts.
That's right.
And that's a big reason why Republicans have maintained control of the House of Representatives, where you serve, sir. So what would you do so the Democrats are in a better position to redraw the map in and after 2020?
Well, let me tell you, redistricting has got to be one of the top priorities of the DNC from the very beginning. The DNC chairman needs to engage state parties and win state legislatures all over this country so that we can position ourselves to be ready for redistricting in 2020. But that means winning in 2018, and that means winning in 2017 in New Jersey and in Virginia. And I can tell you, it is a simple matter of turning on in the off year of campaigning everywhere. That's why in the 100-day plan that I am releasing tonight, I have a 100-day plan, I call for an immediate listening session right after the election on February 25th, where we'll ask DNC members to talk to Democrats all over the country and listen to them, to engage them, and then a summer canvass where we will knock doors all over this country, powered by volunteers, many of the people who are at the marches and at the rallies, and we will win state legislatures and focus on the down ballot races and the governors and the secretaries of state and state treasurers as well. We have got to win up and down the ballots from the dog catcher all the way up, and that is how we're going to be ready for
Congressman, thank you. Mr. Pekarsky, what would you do?
The reality here is that all of us are probably going to do the same thing if elected chair in terms of reforming the party and getting the party working again at a local level where we can regain seats all over this country. I was in Wyoming this last weekend listening to the Wyoming Democrats talk about what they're planning to do. They've got a very tough road to hoe there. It's a lot different than California or New York. But the real problem here is we've got a lot of problems with our election process. I happen to be an expert in the election process and the election system, and the real question which ought to get answered here, I mean, it's on my website. I think the voting members of the DNC know what's going to happen if I'm elected chair. The real question which the voting members of the DNC ought to have answered between now and the vote on Saturday morning is what do all of my learned and respected colleagues here intend to do to protect the voting process if they're elected chair? And that's about what I've got to say. That any one of us gets in, it's going to be the same thing in terms of re-energizing this party on a local basis. Whether it's called
Mr. Pekarsky, thank you. Everybody hold on. We have to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more from the Democratic leadership debate.